Hello, beautiful souls, and welcome back to another episode of
The Happy Hippie Podcast.
I'm your host, Kilee Iris, and I think this might be my favorite podcast episode yet. Today I'm going to be sharing a story of the time I took magic mushrooms. This story happened over 2 years ago now. And I've honestly just been waiting to share this story because it is absolutely mind-blowing. Words cannot describe how excited I am for this episode. So thank you so much for tuning in. Before we dive too deep into anything, I'm going to start off this episode talking a little bit about the science of magic mushrooms, why they work, and just what makes them so magical. The psychoactive compound in magic mushrooms that makes them so magical is psilocybin. Once ingested, the liver converts this compound into another one called psilocin. And psilocin molecules look almost the exact same as serotonin, the neurotransmitter that regulates your mood. So this is why when people ingest magic mushrooms, they get that euphoric feeling. Magic mushrooms produce psychedelic experiences. So what psilocybin does is it increases connectivity between different regions of the brain. So this makes different parts of the brain synchronize with each other. Parts of the brains that normally wouldn't communicate. Parts of the brain that are normally compartmentalized and doing their own thing now have communication with each other under the influence of psilocybin. Over the years, there's been more and more studies of the use of psilocybin curing depression, PTSD, and many different forms of addictions. A lot of people experience a loss of ego when under the influence, which can be extremely transformative for one's perspective on reality entirely. Because when new areas of the brain start communicating with each other, you can actually gain new insights to old problems. This can be extremely transformative. Now that we talked a little bit about the science of magic mushrooms, let's dive right on into the juice. So growing up, I actually had a very narrow-minded perspective on psychedelics. We live in a society that deems this as a psychedelic drug in the same category as like a lot of hard other psychedelic drugs. But I truly believe magic mushrooms are like plant medicine, and I think it deserves a category of its own. I was pretty spiritual growing up, and I remember in high school making a mental note to myself about how I never want to do mushrooms, because at the time I remember wanting to be advanced spiritually without the use of magic mushrooms. During this time of my life, I was doing a lot of breath work and meditation, and I would actually obtain psychedelic experiences through meditation. Over the years, I realized that that was a narrow, closed-minded perspective on mushrooms because at that point, I had a more fear-induced mentality about the drug, and I didn't see it as plant medicine and a gift and healing. And, I didn't really see it like that back then. So my first ever psychedelic experience wasn't with mushrooms. I used to have severe PTSD, and I tried all different kinds of medications to try to cure my PTSD. When every single over-the-counter medication that a doctor would throw at me didn't work, that's when I decided to start meditating and doing more introspection and trying to heal my brain on my own. So to heal my PTSD, I started doing this breathing technique called shamanic breathing. This breathing session takes 30 minutes to an hour. Essentially, you just overload your brain with so much oxygen. It provides a psychedelic experience similar to magic mushrooms without the use of actually taking any drugs. Shamanic breathing is similar to mushrooms in the sense of having, I guess, good or bad trips. Sometimes you can have a scary experience and it can be a little terrifying, but other times it's extremely healing, transformative, and rewarding. Let's talk about shamanic breathing. Shamanic breathing is a naturopathic way to cure things like PTSD. Essentially does the similar things to psilocybin, opens up more pathways in your brain, and you experience a giant perspective shift in this breathing session. The shamanic breathing experience was extremely profound for me, and it gave me similar effects to psychedelics. I just felt an extreme sense of euphoria, really, really happy, no negative thoughts, all my fears kind of vanished. Doing shamanic breathing really opened my mind to psychedelics because I was like, whoa, if I can experience psychedelic feeling, almost like the similar experience with just breath work, not even doing drugs. I was like, imagine the real thing. After this meditation, it really opened my mind to the idea of dabbling in psychedelics because the results were so profound. So I feel like naturally I was really scared to try mushrooms because you hear so much about like bad trips, and like I was terrified about having a bad trip. Personally, I think having a good and bad trip really is all determined on environment and who you are around, as well as your state of mind going into the experience. If you're in like a really negative, bad state of mind, I don't think that would be necessarily the best time to do mushrooms. I feel like bad trips also have a lot to do with environment and who you're around. Back in high school, I remember people were taking mushrooms at parties, which is so mind-blowing. Like, I can't imagine doing such like a spiritual, like profound psychedelic at a party. It's obviously like a very low vibrational environment to do such a mind-shifting, altering drug like mushrooms. My hippie friends, when they do mushrooms, they call it a vision quest, and they'll take a few group of really close friends and they'll go on a mission into the middle of nowhere and experience the trip and a place in nature. I feel like to really have like the best trip, you just need a few people, really close friends, people that you trust, and then you go together somewhere beautiful in nature. And I think that is the best place to experience mushrooms. Not like drunk at a party with like hundreds of people. I have no idea how people do that. My first time and my only time, I've only done it like twice, but my first time ever doing mushrooms, I was living on this tiny surfing village on Vancouver Island, British Columbia. I was surrounded by oceans and old growth trees, truly such a beautiful piece of ancient land with so much history. And this is where I had and experienced my first trip. And I think the reason it was so profound also had to do with where I was doing mushrooms. The energy of the land that I was on is just so magical in itself. So doing mushrooms there was literally, words cannot even describe how mind-blowing of an experience it was for me. But we'll get on into it. So my very first time ever doing mushrooms, I microdosed. My microdosing experience was so profound. I really went into this having no idea what to expect, but I came out of this absolutely mind blown. Microdosing, I basically just felt like super happy, like an extreme rush of joy. The way I would almost describe mushrooms of like when it hits, it feels as though like you just blink. Okay, you close your eyes, and then when you open your eyes again, it's almost like you're a child and you're opening your eyes for the first time. Colors are just so saturated and bright, and you look at the world and everything with such curiosity, almost like childlike thinking. I just remember I was at the beach and I just like put some sand in my hand, and it was like such a crazy experience. It felt like it was like my first time ever touching sand. Just like a sense of euphoria. It was about the second or third hour into the microdose when things started to get a little bit interesting. So I was with some friends at the beach. We were camping at the time. So we came back to the campground and I decided to run away. All my friends decided to go for a walk and they all walked left, and I decided to sneak away and run right. I just had a random like impulse and urge take over me, and I just felt like I needed to be alone. I didn't really understand why, but I kind of just acted on it. So I ran away from the group. I ran away from my friends, and I went to the other side of the campground to a vacant campsite. I was all alone in this campsite, and I sat down on the picnic table. To understand how earth-shatteringly mind-blowing this moment was, you need to understand a little bit of context. So basically, I had a near-death experience when I was 14 years old. Check out episode 2 if you want to hear more about it. Essentially, after this, I had extreme PTSD for about 4 years of my life. During these 4 years, I tested out every single possible form of therapy known to mankind. One of the last forms of therapy I did is called EMDR, which is a kind of therapy they use to help cure PTSD. Basically, in this therapy, you re-experience the trauma in your mind over and over again, and The therapist will use different tapping techniques on you to kind of help rewire your perspective on your trauma and help you see things from more of a positive light. My first day of this therapy, I was told to create a safe space in my mind. Create this place in my brain that I can go back to whenever I'm feeling anxious or nervous or it's overwhelming. You have to visualize this safe space and you constantly go back to your safe space throughout the session. I think I did this therapy for a year, maybe 2, but the whole time I had this same safe space. I visualized this area with grass and purple flowers and trees, and it was just this entire sanctuary I created in my mind, essentially. Throughout the duration of doing this therapy, every time at the start of the session, I would go to my safe space, and at the end of the session, we would close it off with me in this safe space that I created in my mind. Okay, so that is the context. Let's go back to the story. So when I was sitting on this picnic table in the campground, I look up. I had shivers just fill my entire being from head to toe. I almost felt like a little cold. And then I started to feel a faint tapping on my leg. The tapping sensation I felt on my leg was very faint, but it felt extremely familiar. I let that weird tapping feeling I felt on my leg go on for about a minute, and then I looked up. Wow, I literally have shivers just talking about this. I looked up, and the exact landscape that I was looking at, the trees, the way the wind was blowing, the purple flowers, the exact view that I was looking at was the exact same safe space I created 4 years prior in therapy in my mind. Fake thing I created in my head 5 years ago was now a very real manifested thing right in front of me, the exact scenery. This was like an earth-shattering experience for me. This started for me what I like to call a vicious game of connect the dots. That was like my first moment where everything connected. In that moment, I realized like, wow, this is real, and I manifested this from my imagination. And it was in that moment I realized we are all the creators of our own reality, and I realized just how powerful our brains truly are. I could just feel in this moment that everyone and everything in this world is connected. And feeling that connection was such a profound feeling, and it completely changed my life. Okay, this was just microdosing. If I had this earth-shattering, mind-blowing experience just microdosing, like, what is mushrooms gonna do to me? What mushrooms do is it provides a gigantic shift in perspective. And perspective is everything. I almost feel like shrooms are like a forced spiritual awakening. So because this experience was so profound, I decided my very first time ever doing a full dose of mushrooms, I was going to do it alone. So let's get on into the story. So remember before when I was talking about environment and your environment being extremely crucial for your mushroom experience, I decided to do shrooms alone at the beach. So I got to the beach and I climbed this gigantic rock and I sat on the top of it. And that's where I decided to do my first ever full dose alone. Fun little random fact, the beach I was on and the rock I was sitting on was actually in Twilight. They have a few scenes in Twilight on this beach, which has no correlation to the shroom story, but I just thought that was a fun fact to share. Oh my god, imagine I'm like mid-trip, Edward and Bella just spawn in. Growing up, I was naturally pretty spiritual. Profound philosophical questions swamped my brain fairly young. However, I've never channeled energy. I've never directly communicated to source, universe, God, whatever higher power you believe in. I've never done that, ever, in my life. I was open-minded to the idea of that even being possible, but I have never in my life experienced anything like I'm about to tell you guys happened on this rock. So, the first full dose of magic mushrooms, I'm alone on top of this rock. And what did I do on this trip? Well, I wrote a book. I sat down on this rock for 10 hours straight. and I filled an entire notebook front to back, and I wrote a book. Let me just back up a little bit and start with the beginning of the trip. So at first, it was a little bit scary. I don't know how to explain it, but it felt like I was tested. And the beginning of my trip was slightly scary, and I almost felt it was like a test to see if I could get past before I could obtain the knowledge that I did. It's really hard to explain, and it's really weird. The beginning of my trip, I was a little bit scared, and I think that was manifesting, right? I was really anxious and just kind of filled with fear. I took some deep breaths, and I just kind of let it take over me. I don't really know how to describe it, but I kind of just let go of the fear. I just accepted that whatever was going to happen, good or bad. It was for my greater good because I set that intention going into this trip. I went into this just open-minded, not really knowing what to expect, but I did have an open mind wanting some kind of spiritual transformation. And boy, did I get that. I just remember right when it started, I made a Snapchat joking about falling off the rock and sent it to my friends, just trying to be funny. But I don't know if it manifested or what was going on, but I almost felt like gravity was pulling me off the rock and I was falling down. Instead of fighting the fear, I kind of just let it be and let whatever happen happen. And then next thing you know, the fear started to dissipate and then we got into the juice. It was like I could hear my thoughts. And they were really loud. And they also weren't all mine, which I've never experienced before in my life and was terrifying at first. I was so scared about how loud my thoughts were, but I kind of just allowed it to be and they started to flow a little bit more easier. And then I decided to start writing down everything I was thinking. I know this sounds creepy, but a lot of the thoughts I was having just weren't mine. But I decided to pick up a pen and put it to paper, and I started writing down these random thoughts that were popping up in my brain. It felt like I was on this rock for 2 minutes, but also 4 years at the same time. 10 hours went by on this rock, and next thing you know, I have a book filled front to back. But I feel like that word's deceiving. What I wrote wasn't a book. It was a puzzle. Every few minutes, my font would change. I know this sounds weird, but essentially one page I would write normal, how I would normally write. You turn to the next page, I would write it upside down in a way that doesn't look anything like my handwriting. And then the next page was a different handwriting. And then you get halfway through the book, and then there's pages in Chinese. For context here, I don't know Chinese. I don't know. I couldn't tell you the alphabet. I couldn't tell you a word in Chinese, but I wrote a page in Chinese. And then the next page of the book was ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics. For context here, I don't know ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics, but I wrote them down. And every single thought I had was I would write it in a different font. Some of them would be skinny long letters, short fat. Some pages I would write upside down and everything was out of order. Okay, this book was a puzzle because I had to decode everything. It was wild. I believe what I did is I channeled energy for the first time in my life. I believe at certain moments I was talking to the universe. At certain parts, I felt like I was channeling energy from ghosts, different ghosts on the land. But then it started getting more divine. And then I almost felt like I was channeling directly from source, God, universe, whatever higher power you believe in. Once I realized what was going on, I started to take advantage of it. I started asking questions and I would get answers. At the time, I was going through some relationship things. So I was asking questions about, looking back, it's man, if you were to talk to God, ask him anything else. I was asking about the guy I was talking to and relationship stuff. I was asking about why certain problems were happening with certain people in my life. I was taken to glimpses of my past life. I was shown different glimpses of time periods in ancient Egypt And it was so trippy. It's so mind-blowing, and it's also so hard to describe. I'm doing my best here. The face of the person I was wondering about formed into this like Aztec being, and then it showed my face form into the other person, and then it played out this scene in my head. Essentially, he murdered me in a past life, which was crazy. I was shown glimpses into my past lives in ancient Egypt, and it was mind-blowing. At the moment, I was fully receptive to everything. My mind was so open. I just was accepting whatever came to me. The most mind-blowing page of the whole book was located around the middle of the book. On this page, I predicted the world economy over the next 100 years. Like I said, this book I wrote, it wasn't a book. Like, it was a puzzle. And I didn't write out my prediction for the economy over the next 100 years. I drew it. For context here, I'm an artist. I love painting. I paint all of the time. But every ounce of artistic skill I had in this moment went out the window. These doodles I drew were like a third grader drew them. It was like third grade, like scribbled doodles with the year that it would happen and like a few words. So I did probably like 6 or 7 things. And I know you guys are probably wanting me to go into full details about what everything means and all of the decoding. But unfortunately, with this page specifically, I don't think I'm going to know what the fuck the symbols mean until it happens. I just wrote random things for like year 2033, this, year 2074, this, 2096, this. Like it was actually mind-blowing. But it doesn't really make sense because they're little scribble doodles. The doodles don't really make any sense to me, and I don't think they ever will until it actually happens, and then I'll be able to connect like what it meant. I'm sure you guys are wanting me to go into full details about the book and the symbols and the Egyptian and everything I wrote, but unfortunately, all the information of that book lies within my brain and in my brain only. I just felt like I was holding on to such like a valuable piece of information. Don't get me wrong, it was so cool channeling and like writing things down and all this stuff, but like not every single thing made sense. It really is a gigantic puzzle book. I almost felt like carrying it around and just owning it was almost like a liability. I don't know why. I don't know how to word this. I really don't know how to like bring it to. I burned the book. Okay, I ended up burning the book. So the information and knowledge of this book only really lies within my brain. I just felt like this book was too valuable to just have in a physical form like anywhere I live. So for anyone curious out there, the book doesn't exist anymore. I burned it. It lies within my brain, and it's safe there. So yeah, except the symbols. I did take a picture of the symbols of the economy though, and I will have no idea what the hell those symbols mean until it probably happens. For example, like one of the symbols, it was like a house and then a fire and then like a bunch of... It really doesn't make sense, the symbols, but somehow it's connected to the economy. I guess over time we'll see how those play out. I think the most valuable piece of information that this whole experience and writing this book and this trip, I think the most valuable piece of information I got from this was pretty earth-shattering, but I think that's what a spiritual awakening is, right? A spiritual awakening is kind of realizing everything you know is wrong and nothing is really quite as it seems. And that can be a very peaceful, beautiful thing, but it can also be just as equally as terrifying and scary. I think the most valuable thing I learned from this experience was linked to the illusion of time. I learned in this experience that time is not linear. Time is an illusion. Time is relative. It's not linear the way we think it is. It's actually happening all at once, which is obviously an extremely hard concept to grasp your brain around. If I were to explain this to you guys in a visual, okay, planet Earth, the third dimension, picture it like a flat plane, okay? And then above it, stacked on top, is just infinite universes, parallel universes above and below, okay? All these different like possible realities, if you will, are happening at the same time. That is how psychics and spiritual people can channel and do these things, because it's happening all at once. The way we've created our society is very linear, because that is how we perceive time, right? That's how we're taught in history. We get taught about the early stages of Earth up until where we are now. The timeline we have is actually very wrong. The history we've been taught is very incorrect. And time truly is an illusion, because it's all happening at once. This is a very difficult concept to grasp your brain around. It took me a long time, and I'm still working on it. So I understand if that sounds confusing and makes no sense to you right now, but maybe one day you will, connect the dots, if you will, and it'll click into your brain. It took me a long time, so I don't blame you if you're confused. Different lifetimes, different dimensions, every single possible parallel reality of this universe, it's all happening at once. The past and future don't exist. The only real moment is the now, the present moment. And when you live in the present moment, your entire life changes. And ever since this experience, I started living more in the present moment. Also, I'm talking about this shroom experience like it was casual, but this was like an earth-shattering, mind-blowing experience for me. I only did shrooms one other time after that, and that time I decided to do with my friends. So I grabbed my close buddies and we went to a place called Mushroom Island. Yes, we did mushrooms on Mushroom Island. This tiny little island we walked over to, we sat on this rock that overlooked the entire ocean view. It just kind of affected me differently than everybody else. Like, we all did the same mushrooms, the exact same amount, and my friends were just like laughing their ass off most of the time and like, ha, like bubbles. Like, that's like what their shroom trip was like. But I was, once again in my head thinking thoughts that aren't mine, which kind of scary at first, but also kind of cool. I guess that's channeling energy, picking up on ghosts. I don't know. I don't really know what was going on. A few hours went by and me and my friends are still on this rock, but we were just amazed. We were all in awe because we were looking up at the sky. And under the use of psilocybin, every single one of us, there was probably 5, every single one of us looked up in the sky and we saw the same thing. A lot of people report looking up at the sky on magic mushrooms, and it almost looks like a mandala. It's like this pretty grid thing in the sky, and you see it across the entire sky. My friends were just sitting on the rock like, wow, that's so pretty. Just on mushrooms. How normal people probably trip. I just remember looking at the sky and being like, yeah, that's the energetic grid that connects everyone and everything in this third dimensional reality that we're currently living on. And I just kept going on and on. And it's almost like it just comes to my brain like that. It's so weird. I don't know. It was cool though. Like I said, I was spiritual before, but this really took my spiritual journey to a whole nother level. You have an intense ego death also when under the influence of mushrooms, which can be extremely transformative because perspective is everything. And being able to have a shift in perspective changes everything. And the perspective shift that I obtained, I wasn't viewing the world in the lens of me in this body right now and Kilee Iris. I was looking at the entire world from beginning to where we are now, how we got here, where my perspective was so grand and far-fetched from one tiny little human on earth. I just started asking questions so grand and I got answers, which, doesn't always come, but that was pretty cool. This was a life-changing, earth-shatteringly mind-blowing spiritual awakening for me. I mean, I literally wrote in Chinese and ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics. What? Can't even spell my name right. What do you mean I wrote in Chinese? Right after this experience is when I got my tattoo on my shoulder. This was another cool, random, spooky thing. So I got a sun and moon tattoo. Now, the sun and moon represents the masculine and feminine energy, and really becoming the best version of yourself is learning how to balance out those energies to become the best version of you. Anyways, after my trip, I got this sun and moon tattoo to represent my spirituality. A couple days after getting this tattoo, I grew a mole, a little freckle in between the eyes, the middle of the forehead on this tattoo. For those of you who don't know, that is your third eye. I grew a freckle, a little mole, right on the third eye of this tattoo after getting it. For those of you who don't know anything about your pineal gland and the third eye, and having a spiritual awakening is essentially like having like an opening in your pineal gland, an opening in your third eye. That was like the cherry on top for like how shocked I was by everything. Oh, look, I just had a spiritual awakening, so I get this tattoo, and then a couple days later, I grow a mole on the third eye. Like, what? I don't know. I just thought that was so crazy. Like I said before, spiritual awakenings are equally both exciting and terrifying at the same time. It's learning everything you know and have been fed your whole life is a lie. And nothing really is quite what it seems. There's a lot more to this world beyond what we can feel, see, touch, and smell, right? There's that sixth sense. And I think under the use of psilocybin, that sixth sense can really become activated. And you can tap into the world of energy and spirituality, and that is such a beautiful place. I feel like the use of psilocybin can really help you activate that sixth sense. There is so much more to this universe beyond what we can see. The last time I did mushrooms was 2-3 years ago. That is the story I just shared with you. I would obviously be open to trying them again, but because my experience was so profound, I decided it was probably best to space out my uses. Yeah, I'd love to hear your stories. Please leave them in the comments down below. Rate 5 stars if you're listening on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. It really helps me out. Thank you guys for listening. I love you so much, and I'll see you next Wednesday. Peace. Maybe every other Wednesday, because sometimes I'm slow with that, but I'll do my best. Love you.